So, greetings from Redwood City, from IMC. And I want to begin this talk by referring to a sentence, a passage in the teachings of the Buddha that I found a little perplexing and became a source of thinking and reflection, what it could mean. And the Buddha refers to people who are going along, engaged in their life, without any concern for the welfare of themselves or the welfare of others. And the way that the ancient language Pali talks about this, it says without any. It says they are engaged in neither the welfare of self nor the welfare of others. Neither the welfare of self nor others. And the word for self is atta. Many of you know the word because of the word anatta, which means not self, often considered to be a central teachings of the Buddha. In this passage, he talks about people who have no concern for their own welfare, for their self, or for others. And makes me wonder, who is it that has no concern, for the welfare of both themselves or others? What kind of person is that, or how does that happen? And one hint at how to understand this sentence has to do, in fact, with this word atta, often translated into English as self. And because of this strong emphasis often that teachers use, that insisting that Buddhism teaches that there is no self, or this not self teaching, that nothing qualifies as a self, often there's very strong resistance to use the word self in any kind of way that people can that implies that there is a self. But the word atta also sometimes refers to something, we'll say it this way first, that the focus here is on self and other, atta and para. And this is one of the fundamental orientations, perspectives, perceptions that people need to have, need to know where their self is, their body, their being, and where others are in space. If I'm crossing the road where there's a lot of traffic, I need to have a strong sense of where the self is, where I am, where this being is, and where the cars are. And I hope the other drivers have a strong sense of where they are and where I am, and really have a strong sense of self and other to navigate that. If someone is watching from the sidewalk, and they might see that, yes, these people, me walking across, the people driving, they all seem to be finding their way just nicely. And they have a clear sense of who's who. And we behave in the world often with a very strong, clear idea of there's myself here and there's someone else over there. And that's observed from the outside, that there is this clear behavior in which people behave by whether there's a clear sense of who they are, where they are in space, where they are socially. And so this idea there's a self here and other there is part of healthy living. It might not be on the inside so conscious or the forefront of their thinking about themselves, but someone observing from the outside will see there's one person, there's another person, and there's a clear sense of differentiation going on as part of they navigate the world. And so this teaching that some people have neither care for themselves or care for their welfare of self or welfare of others, I think are people who don't have any connection to their inner life, to their atta. And the word atta here doesn't refer to a singular thing, but rather an abstract notion of this being here, this inner life here, this sense of a personhood that have feeling and sense and experience. And by using the word atta, it's a very rich word in ancient India. And it refers to something really rich and valuable that's here. But it's not something permanent. It's not something unchanging. But rather, it's the overall feeling of how we are at any given moment. The inner life, how it is. And sometimes Bhikkhu Bodhi, the great translator, who will occasionally translate the word atta, self, by the English word mind. Because in the context, it clearly refers to something internally within us. And so it means more like something like the mind, as opposed to the soul or some central thing, the self. And so this idea of the inner life, probably one of the most common words that the Buddha used is in fact the word mind, a very rich word called citta. Citta means mind, heart. It's the kind of the totality or quality of this inner life that we can have. And this inner life, this inner sense of vitality, of quality, of peace or agitation or happiness or unhappiness, or whatever kind of the feeling is inside, that's not a thing. That's not an unchanging essence. It's rather a gestalt of all the shifting, changing things that are going on for us. That it varies from day to day, occasion to occasion. But in Buddhist practice, we are caretaking for it. So someone who has no connection to this inner life in themselves also will have no understanding of the inner life of other people. And so will have no sense of how to care for it. Other people then just become objects, maybe objects of their desires or objects of their wrath and anger, objects of people who interfere with the free expression of desires, this free wanting of things or getting rid of things. But once we start having a deeper and deeper inner life, we stop living on the surface of our desires, on the surface of desires and hates and preoccupations that kind of, just don't really have any depth to them. And people who live in that surface life will just go around from one addiction to another, one maybe sensual pursuit to another, one kind of belief, one expression. And often it looks very can be a lot of conceit in someone who lives on the surface of their life, because it's all about their desires and wants and what they don't want, and without any care and concern for other people at the most extreme level. And so the Buddha seems to recognize there were people like that. And but that all begins to shift when there starts to be an inner life. And then there's more care for others and a deeper kind of care for oneself, because one knows what to care for. We begin knowing what is real welfare. It's not just being able to buy whatever one wants or have whatever recreational opportunities one wants, but those things might actually not support this deep, deep kind of flowering of our welfare from the inside out. So this idea, this sentence that some people are neither engaged in the welfare of self nor in the welfare of others, comes from a very interesting teaching where the Buddha refers to 4 kinds of people according to these categories. So the first one is engaged in neither the welfare of self nor in the welfare of others. The second is someone who is engaged in the welfare of others, but not in the welfare of the self. The third category are those who are engaged in the welfare of the self, but not in the welfare of others. And the fourth category are those who are engaged in the welfare of the self and the welfare of others. And these 4 categories, And I like to think of these four as being four dimensions of our inner life. I also like to think of them as a little bit of as a developmental model of how some people can grow and develop this inner life over time, maybe. And we find that in teachings of the Buddha, he was very much, probably in this modern world, he'd be considered a developmental psychologist because he saw in so many different ways that people's inner life grows and develops over time, and that it's something that's cultivated, something that we bring conditions together with, we tend, we care for, and allow it to deepen or unfold or grow and develop, get stronger over time. And he had many, many perspectives in which to appreciate this potential for inner growth and change. And given all the different models he has, this four categories here, I think, represents a little bit these four dimensions, these four maybe even stages of growth that people can have. So, to have no interiority at all, no sense of connection to the inner life, to the heart, to what goes on, maybe is how some babies are born, and so and as babies grow up, at some point, little infants are very oriented towards others, and it's the belonging and modeling and mimicking and learning from others is kind of the name of the game, and tuning into how the others, the caretakers, are feeling and how they are is maybe not they're caring for them, but there's a sense of very strong orientation out there. At some point as we grow up, we're not looking for everything we need to learn and do and be taken care of from others, but we learn to take care of ourselves. Some babies learn to self-soothe, relatively early, but to learn to slowly begin to take care of this inner life and become a little bit more and more autonomous at taking care of our own welfare. And if all goes well in the childhood development, then at some point we have a good sense of how to take care of ourselves and certain autonomy in our own inner life. But there's all kinds of ways in which that's stunted growing up. If we don't feel safe, if we don't feel loved, if we don't get the feedback system from the parents around us and the family around us, we're not getting our needs met as a young child, then it's a little hard to feel that understanding how to care for ourselves and how to care for others. And we tend to kind of recede to the surface of our life, maybe just to be safe, or because we don't know anything interior, or it's so painful in there that people recede to the outside so they don't have to feel inside. When one of my sons was maybe 1.5 to 2 years old, he had a playmate who, another boy, who started getting into this habit of hitting and biting other kids. And the parents were quite distressed, and they went to a child psychologist. And the psychologist said that whenever the son began doing that, they should smother him, just fill him with love, just hold him, hug him, just care for him and love him. And the first instinct of the parents was that that just rewards the behavior. And the psychologist said, no, just do it. And they did it, and very quickly that behavior stopped. That somehow that little kid wasn't getting this kind of reassurance and settledness that he needed. And so he was lashing out as a kind of substitute for that, or as an anger of that, or frustration of that. So this idea of tending and finding what's in here and having it settled, and having in these different stages of development, having these be done well, so that we can care for ourselves, can care for others, because of this reciprocity that we grow up learning from family and community and others, that we're learning this intimate reciprocity of mirroring, of mutual support, and so eventually becoming more and more autonomous and being able to care for ourselves And then at some point, that autonomy outgrows the sense of self, outgrows the sense of limited sense of me, myself, and mine. It breaks forth, breaks down the boundaries, the artificial boundaries between self and others, not to kind of return to some childhood, um, you know, non-differentiation of self and other, but rather to be clearly differentiated, but to have that differentiation without any hard boundaries, barriers, maybe barriers is a better word, between self and other, where the inner life of others and the inner lives of ourselves is something we can, and ourselves, is something we're acutely aware of and sensitive to. And that deep inner life is deeper than conceit, deeper than any selfishness. It's the place where our goodness comes from, our care, our kindness, our love can come from. And so there, the concern then becomes the care, the welfare of both atta, the self, the mind, the heart, and the care of others. And because we really know the quality of our inner life, we're really in touch with it, we cultivate it, the greater we're kind of cared for this, the greater is our sense of empathy, of care, of love, or resonance with other people as well. And so of course we're going to be concerned for the welfare of others, maybe equally as we do for the welfare of self. So 4 stages of human growth where the word atta, self, is used in a very positive way, not as a reified, made real, essential self, but rather the self as the quality of our inner life, the quality of our heart, our mind, that we are the gardeners for, we're the care tenders of. And part of the function of mindfulness is to keep coming back here, to really cultivate this deep, deep place that allows our care for the world to arise out of some of the deepest places we have within. There's this one passage where the Buddha says, it's a poem, having let go of conceit, the settled mind, the settled self, the good mind, is everywhere freed. And here it seems that the settled self and the good mind maybe are almost the same. Maybe they're synonyms of each other or closely related. And here again we have the word atta, but it doesn't mean this essential permanent thing. I think it just means something like the citta, the mind, the inner life, the quality of it. Having let go of conceit, the settled self, the good mind, everywhere freed. Dwelling alone in the forest, diligent, one can cross beyond the realm of death. I think it's a nice poem. Having let go of conceit, the settled self, the good mind, is everywhere freed. Dwelling alone in the forest, diligent, one can cross beyond the realm of death. What does that mean, to go beyond the realm of death? And then here's another interesting poem that who loves the self, who wishes for greatness, should deeply revere the Dharma, remember the Buddha's teachings. The idea, who loves the self. So this, whatever this atta is, there is a place for this inner life to be loved, to be cared, to be tended for. And this very curious expression, who wishes for greatness. I don't think as this conceited greatness, like I'm so great and so wonderful. I think it refers to this, again, this inner life, this inner mind, state of consciousness, state of mind, state of heart, that becomes magnanimously great, that becomes boundlessly full and large, that this movement on the path of liberation is not one that we get more and more small and constricted, but there's some boundlessness in there, an openness and fullness that it is there. Maybe a fullness and greatness that is there because the limitations and constrictions of a narrower, small sense of self has been dissolved or let go of in a deep way. And finally, two more verses. If one knows one's self, or if one knows the self is dear, the sage would guard the self with care. And the word guard is to watch over, but it also means to nourish, both to nourish, to guard, to watch over. If one knows oneself is dear, the sage would guard oneself with care, would nourish oneself with care. So again, this, there is something here to tend to. And the deeper we tend to it and settle, any concern you might have that's being selfish will dissolve, because that can't be sustained. And then finally, oneself is the refuge of oneself. What other refuge can there be? The self is the refuge for oneself. The mind is the refuge for oneself. What the quality and care of one's inner life becomes one's own refuge. So tend to your garden well. Be a witness, be a tender, pay attention to what goes on within. Notice the quality of it, not so you can be, selfishly kind of looking to find pleasure for yourself, but rather to really discover how to set it free, so that whatever painful movements of greed or hatred, delusion, conceit that lives in there can be resolved, can be healed, can be settled. So we can go deeper and deeper to the depths of what's really good, what's really wonderful in this inner being, inner life that we're capable of having. And when it becomes so settled and so free, then we get turned inside out. And it doesn't really make sense anymore to talk about the inner life. It's just a life that we live, the quality of this life that we live and share with others. And then we become we become concerned with, engaged with the welfare of the self and the welfare of others. This whole enterprise of the Buddhist path goes in the direction of caring for self and caring for the whole world. If you want to know if someone is enlightened in Buddhism, see if they're helping the world. That's really the litmus test of Buddhist maturity along the Buddhist path. So thank you. And thank you for this morning and giving me a chance to share my thoughts. And I look forward to more times like this together. Thank you. I see that there are some chats here about the references. The reference to these four different categories of concern for welfare of self and welfare for others is from the Numerical Discourses of the Buddha, 495 chapter 4, the 95th sutta. And these poems that I've been reading, the first couple of them come from the connected discourses of the Buddha, 1.9 and 6.2. And the last verses are from the Dhammapada. So it's wonderful. Thank you. Well,